Hey everybody, Joe Joseph here for the dailysheeple.com, and this is your daily news brief. Okay, guys, so we had the inauguration on Friday, and Donald Trump sworn in, 17-minute speech or so, not straight and to the point. Didn't really lay out a lot of specifics, but certainly gave that rah-rah, siskumba pep talk to all of the supporters that attended the inauguration, and rightfully so. I mean, it was his day, so let him bask in the sun, if there was any sun. Of course, I think there was a pastor that had said to Trump that because it rained on the day of his inauguration, well, that means it was, basically ordained by God that was supposed to happen. So, hey, very, very interesting indeed. But you have to admit that Trump is a lightning rod. Whether or not he's a distraction, he certainly is a lightning rod. Most lightning rods often provide many a distraction. And it remains to be seen what he's going to do. But the Daily Sheeple the other day mirrored a piece by Charles Hugh Smith. Trump is a lightning rod, not just for disaffected progressives, but also for panicked insiders. And we've seen this as the Eastern establishment, they fear and they loathe outsiders. They don't like it. And what happens? They normally seek to destroy them via the mainstream media. What we did see, though, is on Saturday, we saw Trump's press secretary come out and immediately attack the mainstream media for misrepresenting not only the size of the crowd for inauguration, but also for reporting that the bust of Martin Luther King was removed from the Oval Office when Trump took power. And it's interesting because, of course, it did not happen. But you can see how the mainstream media will twist things to cause that divide and conquer. And if there's one positive to be gleaned from all this, is that it's being called out when it happens. And that's critically important if you're trying to showcase just how the propaganda works with the mainstream media, how they do this, how they manipulate, how they embellish, if you will. And so Charles Hugh Smith writes, he says, political antagonists and agnostics who are skeptical about big government solutions, left or right, view the current hullabaloo about the Trump presidency with some detachment. What's remarkable to us is the extremism, not just of those bitter about Clinton's loss, but by insiders who are threatened by the possibility Trump may upset their insider skims and scams. An opening observation: I don't recall bitter Nixon supporters issuing any death threats to performers at John Kennedy's inauguration in 1961, and the 1960 election was extremely close. As a matter of fact, if you recall, Kennedy also lost the popular vote. Nixon actually won the popular vote but lost the election. Charles continues, he says, I also don't recall bitter Gore supporters issuing death threats to performers at G.W. Bush's inauguration in 2001, even though the 2000 election came down to a few hundred votes in Florida. Trump is a lightning rod for a spectrum of people and organizations. He says, let's see if we can separate the spectrum into socio-political groups. In times of turmoil, identifying a boogeyman or boogie woman as the cause of the turmoil is a classic mechanism for shirking responsibility and agency. This is a psychological source of witch hunts. It's all the witch's fault. Scapegoating, show trials, and so on. It isn't our fault things are falling apart, or the fault of our institutions. Why, it's the boogeyman's fault. Now, this transference or projection concentrates the blame and responsibility on the other, a scapegoated group, or even better, one individual or small group. Those making the accusation reckon pointing the finger at some targets lets them off the hook. I'm blameless. Why, it's all his fault. Now, Trump is tailor-made for the boogeyman part. The Russians are also tailor-made for the boogeyman. part. And decades of films depicting the heroic Americans besting the low-down dirty commies seem to have seeped into the American ID. When in doubt, blame the Russians. And if they are temporarily unavailable for scapegoating, well, then we got those pesky Asian boogeymen that we can always blame as well. Now, for progressives, symbolism is more important than substance. Never mind that the incomes, wealth, and opportunities of the bottom 95% have steadily eroded in the 8 years of the Obama presidency, or that an American neocon or neoliberal foreign policy was running amok globally. See, to progressives steeped in the mythology of political correctness, the symbolism of the speech acts being uttered matter far more than the substance or the consequences. President Obama didn't just promise hope and change. He was a legal master of developing the symbolic speech acts that progressives long to hear because they confirm the worldview of legalisms, rights, and all other high points of the mythology of political correctness. In other words, we don't actually have to threaten the status quo by changing anything. All we really have to do is utter the correct phrases, and the erosion of civil liberties, opportunities and wealth will all magically vanish in the warm and fuzzy phraseology of political correctness. No wonder Trump is like a fingernail on the chalkboard to progressives lulled into somnambulance by 8 years of symbolic speech acts. And that's exactly what's been done. Because if you look at what actually came about during the Obama presidency, it did not bring about the hope and change. I hope people see that. I know most of the people that subscribe to the Daily Sheeple, either via the newsletter or via this YouTube channel, know full well because you've experienced it in your life. You've experienced the erosion of quality of life. You've seen the decline in cost of, or the increase in cost of living, which has really decreased your ability to live that American dream, if you will. And it doesn't just stop there. We've seen the erosion of civil liberties. You know, it's interesting going from the South up to the North. And mind you, I was born and raised in the North. The stark difference in worldview and also in what should be, if you think about what liberal actually means, you would think that people would have a lot more leeway to do things in a liberal state that affect personal freedoms and liberties. But that's just not the case. As a matter of fact, it's the total opposite, because what used to be a movement of personal liberties and freedoms, you know, with a strong social safety net to pick you up when you fell down, and this whole notion of civil rights and equality, were your typical, that was kind of the narrative for a long time with the left and the liberal establishment. But once we hit the 70s and then into the 80s, we saw the changeover from that into hardcore communistic type of ideals, which, of course, were ingrained into the very heart of what America is today. Because if you take a look at American society and then you read, say, Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, you can see that the 10 planks are firmly in place here in the United States. So this idea that we live in a land of freedom and democracy, even though we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic, it's all words. It's lip service. It's to make you feel warm and fuzzy. It's because at one point in time, we actually did have freedom, and we actually did have the ability to live our lives and pursue life, liberty, and and happiness. But where is it today? It's all lip service. It's all lip service, you know? But you go drive down the street, you might hit a checkpoint to check your ID or to see if you are drinking or any other excuse they can use for taxation by citation. Among all the other ways that they may, say, wiretap you without your consent and then send all that information to Buffdale, Utah to be stored permanently for a long time. You know, Buffdale, Utah, as it stands right now, and if you don't know Buffdale, Utah, of course, that is the NSA's data storage facility. It has the capacity to store every communication on the face of the planet for the next 100 years at this time. That's without being upgraded. It can do that right now. I mean, that is unbelievable. That is extraordinary. So will a President Trump roll that back? I don't think so, because he, if you noticed in his speech, really went out of his way to tell you that he's going to keep you safe, that the threat to America is Islamic extremism, even though if we left the area, if we left the Middle East and let people live their lives the way they want, I don't think we would see much Islamic extremism. As a matter of fact, what you would probably see is the Islamic world celebrate a victory that, hey, ha, woo, we can live our lives again without an imperialist power trying to tell us how to live our lives. And I can tell you that if that happened here in America, we would probably react in a very similar fashion. Whereas if you had this imperialist power with limitless pockets and unbelievable military strength come into your area, how would you fight them? How did the Vietnamese fight the Americans? Why, they did it with guerrilla warfare. They did and used tactics that would be considered terroristic in today's arena. And honestly, guys, if it happened to us here today, we would employ the same practices that these adversaries, and I say that, let me say the adversaries of our rogue government, because they're not our adversaries. They are the adversaries of our rogue government and its rogue policies to, you know, this is what they did. They fought back, just like we would fight back. So it's asinine to hold these people or look down on them when really, who was the ones that came in and invaded their territory? Think about that. And then, of course, he's very big on the police state. And being very big on the police state would mean that he is probably not going to roll back any sort of surveillance and anything that would be considered safe or safety for, you know, anything that would be considered safe practices to keep our citizenry safely. I mean, it's crazy. They use a couple of words and everybody's like, you know? And I mean, if you take a look and read the works of Trotter, you read the works of Laban, you read the works of Bernays or Rapai or the many other psychoanalysts throughout the years that have promulgated these policies and these procedures to brainwash the masses, you understand when this stuff comes out what they're really trying to do. And I know you've heard a lot of people on the other side of the fence compare Donald Trump to Hitler. And I don't think that that is a very fair comparison. But you can certainly see parallels in a lot of the policies that they want to put forward, especially with regards to the police state and especially when it comes to foreign policy. So we have to be very careful not to mistake things like, and to me, this is all kind of lip service. For example, Trump saying, well, we're going to pull out of NATO. We're going to pull out of the UN. I would be very surprised to see him do it. Now, we may be able to. I don't know if Trump could do it. I think that is a congressional action. And I'll bet you'll have a hard time getting Congress to go along with that. But one thing I can tell you, and this is a SHTF plan article, The legacy of President Obama is deplorable. And we're saying goodbye to who is arguably the worst president we have ever seen. And I thought that Bush was by far the worst president we would ever see. And he was bad. And I didn't like him either. But good grief. I mean, Obama certainly did take it to the next level, did he not? And Max Lavo writes, Obama has been a puppet president and force of anti-American ideology, preferring to treat people as plebes and dependents rather than an independent and proud group of individuals. Never before in U.S. history has the political and social landscape been so sharply divided and so much power titled towards the wealthiest few who pulled strings and held all the power. And its root, the Obama administration was a lot of hype, a lot of pomp and circumstance for a cult of personality figure. But underneath it all, Barack Obama was little more than a front man for the bankers and the warmongers. And think about it, folks. How much time did this guy spend on vacation? How much time did Bush spend on vacation? They spent a ton of time on vacation. Why? Because all they had to do was do what their bosses told them to do. Very similar to these organizations and think tanks that actually write the bills that get put in front of Congress and voted on. Do you think our non-representing representatives would actually lift a pen to craft a bill of any sort in this country these days? Very few and far between. Very few and far between do they ever do that. It is oftentimes think tanks and lobbyists that push these policies forward and have the bills written already, because that's who pulls the strings, my friends. It is not us. It is not the people. And that has to change. That's one thing that President Trump, of course, has promised to change. However, promises from politicians, oftentimes, if all the time, get shelved, if you will. As soon as they're uttered from their mouth, it's gone. Okay, it served its purpose, and now we carry on smartly with our policies because we've lulled the masses back to sleep. And during the Obama administration, of course, we witnessed an amazing loss of civil liberties. We saw the implementation of many mass surveillance programs. We saw a massive increase in drones, the use of drones, both domestic and in warfare. We saw war, just rampant war. We saw healthcare reform, which was not. They should call it healthcare deform. And that's all a part of this bleak legacy that he's left behind. Our foreign policy continued this whole aggressive stance, and it gave rise to ISIS. We created ISIS as a new terror front with geopolitical footing. Because now with ISIS, just like we could with Al-Qaeda, we had that boogeyman with no border and no face. So all you had to do was blame terrorism, a term. But that's all it was. You couldn't go to a country and declare war. You couldn't hold truly an individual accountable. It was a boogie organization, ISIS, just like Al-Qaeda. Obama broke diplomatic relations. He carried out regime change in the Middle East and Eastern Europe and conceded any gains made in Iraq while failing to break off from Afghanistan or even close Guantanamo Bay, because we truly believed that he had every intention of doing that. He covered the collapse they created, and he created new opportunity for those very same bankers, which if you look today, you can see that the very same practices that were employed that led to the collapse in 2008 are being employed today, and bubbles are being blown up and are ready to burst just in time for President Trump to roll out his agenda, which you really can't not believe that they're going to do that, because there's so many avenues for them to push the button, to pull the switch. I truly believe the Federal Reserve and the CIA are going to be the two organizations that are going to be the biggest pushback against any sort of positive policy change that Trump might want to put forward. So I don't know how this is going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen, but I can tell you that Trump has a lot of work to do if he wants to reverse the damage done by President Obama. However, I don't see him reversing all the damage because he embraces some of that damage. He embraces the police state. He embraces aggressive foreign policy with regards to certain allies. And he's already starting to do that. As a matter of fact, The Independent today reported that Donald Trump on Monday is going to announce that the U.S. Embassy is going to move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is very interesting because Tel Aviv is the capital of Israel, not Jerusalem. Not Jerusalem, at least as it stands right now. But it remains to be seen now how this is going to all play out. Why? There's a lot of people out there, both tinfoil hatters and non-tinfoil hatters, that believe Donald Trump will usher in the era that will see the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. Now, if that happens, it's time to watch very closely what's going on, not only there, but in the rest of the world, because there's a lot of people that consider that a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And if that's the case, and that third temple starts to be built or even is built, it could mean that we are very close to very troubling times indeed. I'm Joe Joseph. This was the DailySheeple.com's Daily News Brief. Subscribe to our newsletter over at thedailysheeple.com or this YouTube channel, or both. And I will see you all tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody, and take care.